Welcome to Merlin's Corner, wretched hive of rumor and speculation. Today's topic is, how will drafting work in Lorcana? Well, to begin with, what is drafting? Trading card games tend to have multiple formats with different deck sizes, different numbers of copies of cards, different allowed deck colors, and some even having certain cards fully banned for the sake of balance. But all of these formats can be roughly bisected into two categories, constructed and limited. Constructed is what probably most people think of. You paw through your obscenely massive collection of Doritos sticky cards and cobble them together into a deck that follows the rule set of whatever format you want to play in. Playing in constructed formats competitively can be very expensive because the strongest cards in those formats become must-haves and thus very pricey on the secondary market. On the other hand, you have limited formats, which only cost the price of a couple of booster packs. Limited formats have you opening up packs and immediately putting the cards inside into a deck. Limited decks are therefore almost never optimized for competitive play. Everyone is just doing their best to make something that even plays at all. Of the possible ways to play limited, probably the most popular is draft. In a draft game, when you open up a pack, instead of taking all of the cards in it, you only take one to add to your eventual deck, and then you pass the rest of the pack to someone else. This only works if you're at a table with a few other folks, typically 8 per table. You then get handed someone else's just opened pack, and then pick a second card from that one, pass that, getting a third pack in return. This continues until all the packs are emptied out entirely, and everyone has enough cards to make a deck. While not the most hygienic, hopefully no one at your table has a runny nose, it has a charm to it that I just love. Unlike sealed, which is where you're just handed so many packs and that's it, those are the cards you're allowed to use. In draft, you have access to many more cards because you get to look at everyone else's packs too, even though at the end of the day you end up with the same amount of cards. This gives you more opportunity to try to build around a deck archetype and make something that almost synergizes with itself. Draft decks are typically smaller than constructed decks for two reasons. One, drafting takes time, and the larger the deck, the more time you're spending drafting and deck building when you could be actually playing. And two, the bigger the deck, the more packs are required, and thus more money needs to be spent. To help with the cost, some TCGs have two different kinds of booster packs. Set boosters, which have more rare cards in them, but fewer cards total, usually 12, and draft boosters, which only have one rare guaranteed, but are 15 cards total, and typically cheaper. If you're trying to collect rare cards, you're better off getting a set booster, but if you just need to fill out a deck to the right size, draft boosters are the way to go. So that brings us to Lorcana. How would draft work with this game? Well, looking to Magic, the giant on the current TCG scene, draft decks are 40 cards pulled from 3 15-card draft packs. There are no restrictions with regards to numbers of copies of cards or anything like that, and running multiple colors just means needing to run the right lands. Speaking of those 40 cards, only around 23 to 27 or so are actually going to be playable cards that you drafted. The rest are those lands which make up your mana base, so you only need to use just over half of the 45 cards you draft to make your deck, which gives you a lot of flexibility with deck building. In Lorcana, by contrast, there are no lands because you get resources by turning playable cards into ink. So, however large of a deck you're building, that's the number of playable cards you need. Thus far, Lorcana is only producing 12 card set boosters, so 3 of those would only give you 36 cards, which means you'd probably make a 30 card deck. If we're sticking with the only 2 colors rule, that means you can only draft a maximum of 6 out of color cards before you're just screwed. If we're assuming color distribution is even in every pack, you'll get an average of 2 of each color in each pack for a total of 6 of each color from 3 packs. If you were handed 3 packs and told to make a deck from those, you'd statistically only have 12 cards per color pair, which is nowhere near enough for a deck. Thankfully, drafting does allow you to get access to more cards in a desired color, provided not everyone at the table is going for that color. If you're the only one going for a particular color pair, theoretically at an 8-person table, you'd have access to 96 possible cards, but the odds of you being the only person at your table going for those colors is pretty low, so you can expect something more along the range of 20 to 40. But what if After all that effort, you still have fewer than 30 cards of one color pair. Nive, over at Nive's Nerd Corner, hey Nive, came up with the idea of an Inkwell card, a card that you can only use for inking and can never actually play. Basically just a basic land from Magic. This lets you fill out your deck to the right size. I think this is a fabulous idea, and better than the alternative of removing color restrictions, which would make decks just way too samey and boring. As you may have seen on this channel, I've been helping Nive test out this format, and I've had some, let's say, criticisms of how it's worked. Firstly, as a caveat, we have seen not even half the complete set, and the rarity distributions of the colors are very wonky right now, so that's making Amethyst and Steel appear a lot more frequently than anything else, which doesn't really help. And these are also tests. The whole point is to see what works and what doesn't. Experimentation is messy. But all that aside, I still think 30 cards is not enough for a deck. There's enough card draw available that it's not that hard to deck yourself, and with the generous mulligan Lorcana has, it becomes trivial to make a consistent deck. You're basically guaranteed to draw into your power pools every game. Hearthstone gets away with a 30-card deck for a few reasons. Your starting deck is only 3 or 4 cards, card draw is a bit harder to come by, you're limited to 2 copies of each card, and emptying your deck doesn't make you immediately lose. You also don't have to spend cards to get mana, you just get it automatically every turn. For Lorcana, I really think a draft deck needs to be 40 cards in line with MTG. That extra 10 cards would go a long way to making sure decks aren't too consistent and also make it harder to mill yourself to death accidentally. The problem is increasing the deck size means you need to use more packs. If in future we get 15 card draft packs, we could still make do with 3, as that's 45 cards total, but 5 off-color cards is a very narrow margin. Even if you don't need Inkwells, which you probably will, you're still running basically every single card you draft, which removes the actual deck building process. For now, we only have set boosters, and 4 of those would give us 48 cards to work with, which is a bit more of a buffer. Going to 5 would give 60 cards to choose from, which would actually require decision making in the deck building process, but would also just add a lot more time in both drafting and deck building, as well as adding more expense. I think for now, until we get draft boosters, 4 set boosters to make a 40 card deck is a good enough stopgap, and if we do get draft boosters, I think I'd like to see 4 of those to get the 60 from which to build 40. Anyway, these are my thoughts about draft. Ravensburger, please make draft boosters! Draft is fun! Let us draft! Come back next time when I speculate something else.